So I'm sitting outside, and you do not have to guess that it is chilly. So I was on a live with a Jamaican that came across my feed some time ago called Darren Speaks. And we were talking about one of his videos, Loneliness in America. And somewhere in the conversation, one of his viewers asked me after I did a post about having migrated to Canada years ago if I would do a video about loneliness in Canada. And it had me thinking. I had many thoughts. And I had two different experiences that might be useful in this topic. But I'll see how I deliver them. I kind of know where I want to go with it, but in my life, you never know what happens, right? Like, I never know really how my thoughts are going to come together. So, and I was just talking actually to a friend about the fact that I landed in Canada the year of Gilbert. Those who know Gilbert was no joke. Hurricane Gilbert hit Jamaica on the 12th of September 1988. And that's when I landed in Canada. And it was the worst winter on record up to that point. Now, there was another winter in 2000, sometime not too long ago, after 2012, I think, that beat that record. But up to that point, it was, if not the worst, one of the worst winters on record in Canada. So I landed in Canada, and my father, who had filed for me, he didn't do a good job of preparing me. I don't know if many other immigrants had that same experience, but I did not know anything. I didn't know anything. I didn't know where I was going. I did not know what was expected of me. There are some podcasts that I hope to move from Spotify onto this platform that will speak about some of my experiences that made Canada not the ideal place for me. But I won't go over that now, as we're talking about loneliness. And for me, I would more want to say the trauma and the culture shock that hit me that would have been classified under loneliness, because I was ripped apart from my life. I was taken almost by force, and I'll explain why by force. I knew as a child that I was being filed for. Now, bear in mind, I did not know my father until age 3, a little bit before starting school, so closer to age 4. I lived in the country with my grandmother, the typical Jamaican story. I met him, and the only memory I have of him was those red shoes. And when you listen to the podcast, you'll hear the story of the red shoes that he brought for me. Then I did not see this man again until I was 8. And I remember, because I remember the dress I was wearing. You know, those days when somebody came to visit from foreign, they would dress you up in your Sunday outfit. So that's kind of why I remember. Forgive me, the trucks are passing. I'm sitting outside. It's really a beautiful day. Well, beautiful is relative. It's warmer than other days. So I came outside. I was playing with the dog. One day I'll do a video with the dogs, because I have a serious dog story. I'm not a dog lover by nature, but man, there's this one little dog. He has decided whether I love dogs or not. He loves me, and he and I just had quite a tussle. But we'll talk about my little dog friend maybe in another video. So yes, I got to Canada, and one of the first things that I must talk about, and all of these things either enable settling in or repel the whole process. Now imagine, this is the dead of winter, one of the worst winters on record. I was not properly dressed to travel to Canada. So I disembarked that Air Canada flight. It was nighttime, and the shock too of, oh gosh, I don't even want to go into that. But having spent quite a bit of time in immigration, I guess filling out the paperwork and whatnot, it just felt like it took forever. I was tired, I was apprehensive, I was crying. I didn't want to go to Canada. I never wanted to migrate to Canada. I never wanted to go with my father. I didn't know him. So I met him at 3. I saw him again at 8. I shan't even go into the story of being used as a pawn between my mother's relationship with him and yeah. But eventually, after much persuasion, my mother, agreed to have him start the filing process. Now, what I remember more about the process than anything else was the fact that his name was not on my birth certificate. And so back then, and maybe even now, oops, sorry, I had to close something, my battery's dying. Back then, if you had a birth certificate and the father, typically it's the father's name is not on that birth certificate, if filing needs to happen, it needs to be added. And of course, I remember the archives. That was the first time I was learning that name. The archives for the record was right there in Spanish Town, in the center, where we have all of these antique looking buildings and so on. So I remember going there several times and sitting and waiting in the car over 1,000 hours, it felt like, while he did the research. And according to him, he had to pay off people to get them to do the research and to add the name. And it took forever. He took several trips coming to Jamaica. And for some strange reason, he always took me with him. I didn't do anything. I didn't go into the center. I didn't go into the records archives location. I just sat there in the car. It was a very boring thing for a child to endure. So anyway, at some point, his name got added to the birth certificate. He proudly showed me my new birth certificate. And the rest of the filing process became a little bit of a blur. As I hunt in my memory, I remember something about the medical. I remember going to the Canadian High Commission, which was in New Kingston at the time. And I remember that, you'd sit and you would get a number. It was actually one of the most nicely appointed buildings I'd been into at that point. Anyway, this filing started, I don't know when, to be honest. So between the time his name was added to my birth certificate, and the time that I know he told me we were leaving, it could have been a few years, because I left 1988. Yeah. I was at the end of my final year in high school. I was on the top of my game. I had finally settled into the rhythm of social life. And that particular December, being the final December and Christmas and all the plans with friends, and it was the big deal. So I was in absolute shock when my father appeared, as usual, out of thin air, because he never announced his arrival, and said, the filing is complete, and I am here to take you with me to Canada. Now, look at it this way. He came at the closing of school. I never forgot. I think we got school break, I don't know, maybe the 15th, 16th of December. And on the 18th, I was told I am leaving Jamaica for Canada. Heartbreak. It was just the most traumatic thing. And I think at some point we need to talk about doing this to children, uprooting them, not preparing them properly. Most people were migrating and it was something exciting. For me, this was holy terror. I couldn't believe somebody would do this to me. And it was not so much going abroad. It's the other part of my migrating to Canada and what I knew lay ahead of me, which is something that I keep trying to keep my platform very joyous. But it was one of the more traumatic experiences that I'm sure I will speak of at some point. But for context, and I will share a link here, It was spoken of in depth in my second prompt journal, which is entitled The Diary of an Abandoned Daughter. It's available on Amazon. It's a prompt journal, so it's not me really telling my life story, but it's me giving snippets and my journey to wellness after all the trauma that I sustained. So, we're talking about loneliness in Canada. One of the things that stood out to me as we got there, we lived in Rexdale, Ontario. And at that point, it was a brand new community, brand new development. And we were on the 16th floor. Now, believe you me, I'd never been 16 floors up to that point in my life. So that was already something. I went to a home with people I didn't know. I didn't know my father. I've seen him, I don't know. I've never seen him for a week straight. I've never spent a physical 7 days with him. I see him in spurts. So if he comes to Jamaica for 2 weeks, I'm fortunate if I see him 2 or 3 times. And those times could range anywhere from 2 hours to 24, maybe 48 hours. On occasion, he would take us to a resort, a hotel in Ochi, because he loved the whole hotel thing. And I must say that the love of tourism I got from those experiences going out to resorts, because that was just like the epitome of my experiences at the time, right? But when we got there, things bothered me. For example, in Jamaica, you're taught to have manners, So you go in the elevator, and as a young girl, I was a teenager, you see people, you say good morning, good evening. Nobody spoke, nobody responded, everybody looked at you, and they all looked so frightful. They were so pale, and they looked so blue and pink and pale. I mean, that should tell you that we were the only black people in that community, and we stood out. I did not know racism. I'll never say I experienced racism, but the coldness of the people mimicked the coldness of the place. The bigger problem for me, though, was that in the dead of winter, I was not given proper gear. So you see how I'm nicely geared up now? This arrival to Canada had no preparation. And as my friend who supplied me with all of this wonderful gear, when she saw me coming outside, will tell you, I'm very sensitive. I'm sensitive to fleece and fur and all of these things. I sneeze and I have runny nose and I have nosebleeds even. So if you can imagine all of that happening while I am trying to navigate why I'm here. I'm with this stepmother who has had nothing but less than positive interactions with my mother, who shared everything with me. Also not a good practice, can I just say. And what else? So we're talking about loneliness in Canada. I felt most alone when I would wake up, and that was my first shocker. I arrived in Canada that first night, and the morning when I woke up, and I'm a typical early riser, there was nobody in the house. No note, no phone call, nothing. So my stepmother had gone to work and my father had left. And much to my surprise came this screaming, hollering, awful child, Daniel, my brother. Of course, I had only seen him once or twice, and he was spoiled. He was rotten. He was spoiled beyond measure. And I'm hungry. That was the first thing that greeted me. And as the days passed, I discovered that I had arrived in Canada to be a babysitter. A babysitter to the child of this woman who was seriously offensive to my mother, and who I was being told I needed to be grateful for, because had she not signed the documents and agreed to me moving there, my migration could not have happened. Was I lonely? Absolutely. I knew no one. I knew nowhere. We were on the 16th floor. You'd look through the window and the entire area down below was blanketed by snow. I went downstairs and I would step into this white thing that most people would get excited about, but I didn't want to be there. I wasn't ready to learn about snow. I wasn't ready to walk in snow. I didn't want to have a snowy experience at all. And that was what I stepped into. Now, my father, and I'll say it over and over again, did not provide gear for me. So he went into a barrel. Now, every Jamaican knows a barrel. And out of the barrel, he took some old, smelly, awful items, scarf and a jacket that was heavier than me. So I put it on and I'm like, oh my God. I was lugging this humongous trench coat, I called it. And it did absolutely nothing for my coldness. It wasn't layered. It wasn't properly done. I guess it was a man's coat or something. And then he gave me these shoes. I wore size 7. The shoes were at least 9.5. And they weren't snowshoes. They were like some soccer boots, something. It was awful. So I am cold from my nose to my toes. Awful. The wind whipped my face and I was crying and the tears were freezing on my cheeks. There was absolutely nothing I enjoyed. And yes, I know we're still talking about lonely in Canada. The family situation was not pleasant. My stepmother obviously held the handle in that whole situation. And so even though my father's parents, as a matter of fact, and siblings were there, I was basically forbidden to go and see them or be around them because there was always drama in the family. And so I spent hours crying. It was funny because once my father said to me, "You are the first person I've ever met who cries in their sleep." So just to tell you how bad it was, I cried every single night for the 30 days I was there. And we will not even get started that this man, in the dead of winter, with all the complaints, medical complaints that I had, thought it was wise to schedule all of these appointments for me to have surgery. So, the dead of winter, I had dental surgery, and then I was also scheduled for knee surgery. You've heard me talk about mobility issues. This started as a child, and so I guess him being proactive figured as soon as I get there, and because I was still within the age where all of this was free and I would eventually get to 18 where it would not be free, let's schedule everything, shall we, with no thought or any interest of the medical implications and the shock and the trauma that I would go through. So here we were, ready to go to surgery. My God. Can I finish this video today about lonely in Canada? I think we should call it Traumatized in Canada. But I'm going to stop right here. And if you want to hear more, let me know, because there is a season where I left because I was already granted a scholarship to go study in Spain. And that was coming up that same New Year. And so I was granted a leave of time to go take up my scholarship and then return to Canada. So if you want to hear more, talk to me in the comments and we shall say a little bit more about lonely and traumatized in Canada. I think that's what I'm going to name this video. Until then, ciao for now.